In just a few years, the cloud has changed everything. Every day, more and more applications are moved to public clouds. But the question shouldn't be how many applications can be shifted to public cloud providers, but which applications should run on public clouds and which should run on private clouds, and how best to find the right balance between the two. Hi, I'm Stan Gibson, and I'll be your host and moderator for this on-demand webcast. Joining me to explore how to align public and private clouds with your business applications are three experts. John O'Shaughnessy, infrastructure architect and senior consultant at Insight. Welcome, John. It's great to have you with us for this webcast.
It's great to be here today. Thank you.
And Juan Orlandini, chief architect at Insight. Welcome, Juan, and glad you could join us for today's event.
So glad to be here myself. Thank you for having us.
And Paul Joyce, North America Corporate Field CTO at Dell Technologies. Welcome, Paul. It's great to have you here for this webcast today.
Hi, Stan. My pleasure. Really excited to be here.
John, Juan, and Paul, to begin, let me ask, what are you seeing with regard to the current cloud landscape?
I'll start with that, Stan. It's really interesting. Our customers, if you look just a couple years back, they were often coming to us with, hey, I'm going to point this at, I'll say, the public cloud guardrail, that, hey, I'm going to try and shift everything I can into the public cloud. And there's various reasons that we can bring out in this discussion. But what we're seeing today is that people are arriving at that really the world is going to be hybrid, that there's some applications that belong and will continue to run on premises. They'll continue to run in colos and in managed service providers, and that there are other applications that really belong into the public cloud for either the services that the public cloud can offer or for various other reasons. Maybe it's elasticity or scalability or locality. But today, really what we're seeing with our customers is helping them understand I describe it as a dial. I describe it as how much, exists on-prem and how much exists off-prem, and what is the right use case for each unique individual business to ultimately drive the most value out of their IT operations.
And I'd like to add to that a little bit, if you don't mind, Paul, is that there's been an interesting shift, as you mentioned, of this hybrid cloud, landing on a hybrid cloud. And some of that was driven because a lot of these cloud migrations were edicts or they were done by mandate. They weren't well thought out ahead of time or necessarily planned ahead of time. Some of these were done because a pandemic hit and all of a sudden we had to go in mass adopt some of the consumption in the public cloud. And some of them were done because that's where you were born. And then you come to find out that, boy, maybe this might be better handled in a slightly different way. But in either case, or any of those cases, it's coming out that there needs to be a more purposeful strategy to the public cloud. And that's the important word in it, is that there needs to be a very deliberate way of approaching every workload individually, because there isn't always a right answer. And it very well might be that it's in the public cloud for everything. It very well may be that you have all private infrastructure. I doubt that, but that's the whole point of it is that you need to be very mindful of and purposeful of how you go consume either on-premises or public cloud resources.
I think, too, when we're looking at the whole landscape, it's different for every one of the customers out there. There are many people who were born in the cloud, as you mentioned, Juan, and for them, it's native. They know what to do. They're building it up from scratch. But many larger organizations that have been around a while are coming at it from an old and dusty data center, and they're not quite sure what to do or where to go. One of the things that we are seeing is people are starting to understand what it takes to operate in a public cloud environment and where it differs and where it's similar from operating things on premises. And these are all things that have to go in the picture that help them move thoughtfully as opposed to just following an edict of everything must go to the cloud immediately.
John, I couldn't agree more. One of the things that we're also seeing is the reason for that. I think your comments there are spot on. If you look at why people are adopting public cloud, initially it was around IaaS consumption. It was around, hey, it's a way to actually get out of just, I'll say, data center operations. But if you look at why people adopt public cloud and cloud services today, it's really about the experience. It's a how, not a what. And more importantly, it's how they attach those to new revenue streams, right? How to deliver more business agility, how to align the capabilities and capacities of consuming services in a way that actually drives business outcomes. I think your comments there are spot on.
Yeah, there's a succinct way of calling that out, is time to value, right? How long does it take you to get from an idea to driving value for the business out of it? And that's actually you think about it as a developer-led conversation. How do I make my developers be able to deliver new value to the organization as quickly as possible? And then the conversation then after that becomes, well, the value's there. Do I scale it where I developed it, or do I scale it somewhere else, or is this more of a static workload? And do I plan for it in yet another place? There's lots of angles and implications to that. That's the time to value conversation is a really, really important one when you consider where do you start with a workload. Now, if a workload has already been written and you want to operate it more efficiently somewhere else, that's a different set of equations and values that you need to consider.
John, Juan, and Paul, let me jump in and ask another question. Why do you see these trends happening?
So I'll take a first stab at that. I briefly touched on that a little bit earlier in my commentaries. There was some migrations into the public cloud that were done by edict or mandate rather than by careful consideration. So that's part of it, right? Part of it, too, is that as these migrations or these consumptions of the public cloud and in a native way started happening, not all of the parameters were well understood. And those could have been financial parameters. It could have been operational parameters. It could have been scale parameters. Now, there's a lot of different considerations that should have been looked at a little bit more carefully, or maybe not even well understood, so that you could consider them carefully. And as you started consuming more of the cloud resources, or even some of the on-premises resources, that started driving some of these reanalyses events where you got to take a look at this and say, hey, am I doing this right thing? Did I move it too fast? Did I consider this in the right lens so that it makes sense for my business as it is today and then into the future?
I think other things, again, that are driving this trend are time has gone by. When things started, particularly with the public cloud, many people were enticed by the idea that they could drop a credit card on a table and pay $50 a month for a virtual machine, and they could get it in minutes. And that image in their mind drove so much of what IT was trying to do to hurry up and move to public cloud. And I think people understand that it can be an absolutely perfect environment, but only for certain workloads. And that decision can't be made without understanding what your environment has in front of you. So those are some of the things I think that are driving the trends today versus, say, 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, John, I agree. You mentioned cost in your comment. I think there was this traditional belief that we would run into a lot in conversations that it was public cloud equals cheaper. And it's very interesting today that that's not the mindset that I hear when I get to talk to various companies and out there, that most people are saying, hey, I know that public cloud isn't cheaper now. I'm using it for the right reason. So Juan, you even said, like, what's the practical approach to this? What's the purposeful approach to this? If you think about just a couple years ago, I think people were saying, hey, let's lift and shift everything we can because it's cheaper. And today it's, hey, we really need to understand what it is that belongs there and for what reasons. And so if you think about why, to the root of this question, why are these trends happening? Well, there's a couple. There's various surveys out there. One ESG, 77% of, for example, of organizations have repatriated a mission critical workload from the public cloud. Maybe it didn't have the availability that they thought that it would have, or that they could drive, managing their own IT environments. IDC a couple years ago had a study that said, hey, 81% of the people they surveyed had brought something back out of the public cloud, and there were some bold, statements around how much of that was going to come out. I don't think any of these things are signals that public cloud adoption is going to slow down. I just think that it is all being driven because, hey, when we just pick random things up and we move them to the public cloud, it doesn't always align to the business requirements. It drives a lot of complexity when you think about multi-public cloud adoption. If you look at, hey, I'm going to adopt some AWS and some Azure and some Alibaba and some Google, and I'm going to try and build my own, you get a lot of duplication of skill sets and silos of operations and silos of data, which drive massive complication, just managing it, and massive complication in actually how to drive value out of it. And so I think that that's what people are coming to realize, that what people envisioned was this, hey, I'm going to build out some sort of way that I can provide services locally, aka provide a cloud experience, and I'm going to attach it to a public cloud, and it's going to be simple. It's going to have a single operation model. It's going to have a single management model. It's going to be seamless to the end user. And what everybody found out in this is one, that's not the case at all, obviously. And then two, as we align and decide which clouds to run our applications in based on the services that they provide, it's very, very, very complex. And so the reason people are looking into hybrid, the reason, that they're adopting these sort of strategies is to try and hopefully provide that single and consistent management and orchestration, that single version of how you consume, that single version of the how or the what.
You know what strikes me about that conversation, and I think you're dead on, Paul, is that you said a few things that are almost at odds with each other. So having a hybrid or a multi-cloud where you're having services from AWS and Azure and Google operating under a single umbrella, that's incredibly challenging. You don't go learn cloud and, oh, by the way, this is how Google does it or this is how Azure does it. You got to go learn Google. You got to go GCP. You got to go learn Azure. You got to learn AWS. And each and every one of those things is a career and a staff in and of itself. So finding that common ground that operates across all of them is incredibly challenging and difficult. And in fact, one of the statistics that we're seeing and one of the behaviors that we're seeing across our client base is that many organizations are saying, I don't even want to run the cloud. So is there a managed service offering that can operate the cloud for me? Because I just want to innovate and run my business. I'm in the business of making some product or offering some sort of a service to end users. I don't want to even worry about this cloud stuff. That's what was supposed to be done for me. And it's really, really challenging, right? And for some of those clients, they're saying, hey, that was so hard to move it up there to the public cloud, and it's now cost me so much more because I wasn't aware of everything. I need to bring some of that stuff back and just let somebody run it for me there. Because that's actually a better understood environment for us. So there's lots of complications in this and how to go about fixing it.
Yeah, we're starting to see similar messages across our customer base. And again, I think they were driven for cost savings. And we would try to caution people, as we would in any large organization or a migration event, is let's take the time to look at your environment. Let's understand how your organization are using these key applications, these key workloads. Let's understand what they're tied to so we can make the right decision for where this workload should land based on its requirements. But oftentimes people didn't want to take the time to do that because they thought they were going to save a ton of money. And those are the people we're seeing bring back at least part of their environment because they're finding out that what they decided to move to public cloud may not have been the right choice. Whereas alongside of it, they may have had another application that was really a better fit, that could more easily take advantage of elasticity and the costs related to having resources be available only when needed, et cetera. So again, I think people are starting to take that time to really analyze what their requirements are.
I think that brings us to our next question, which is, how can companies address this?
And again, I think what we do with that is we have something we refer to as workload alignment, but it's this idea of understanding, helping clients understand what their environment is, helping them understand who their key users are. So we understand what the needs are at the front end, And then on the back end, understanding the technical requirements of what it takes to support that environment. And only from that can you make the right decision of where to go and how best to get there.
So I'll just step in with a little bit of a different view on that exact same statement. One of the things that we found is that regardless of how you end up in the cloud, is you have to follow a journey, and underscore have to. If you were mandated to born into, or however you ended up going into the public cloud, if you don't follow the journey, the rigorous methodology that lets you purposefully adopt public cloud, you ultimately end up having to redo that anyways. So go back to the beginning and be mindful and purposeful about the entire process. And that's actually something that we're seeing quite a bit is that if, say, for example, as part of the pandemic response, you had to spin up a bunch of virtual desktops in the public cloud. That was done in an emergency mode. We literally overnight had to spin up hundreds, if not thousands, of desktops. And the only place that you could do that and do it effectively and rapidly was in the public cloud. We're 8-9 months in now, and it's time to take a look back and say, hey, is that the right place for it? And for some of our clients, it's the absolute exact right place. For others of our clients, they're looking at it and going, you know, based on the way my workforce operates, how my workloads operate, it might be better to go back to the very beginning, reanalyze that, and bring that workload back on premises. Either way, you still need to do that whole methodology of making sure that you looked at the workload, measured it, understood what it's going to cost and to run and to operate in the location that you end up putting it in.
Juan, I actually love the term you use, purposeful. I've often described, I think, the same thing as practical, and it's come up a couple times in this conversation. You know, it's interesting when I get the opportunity to talk to, you know, the companies that we engage with and really get down to some of the raw, hey, do you have a really good understanding of that application profile, Juan, that you were describing? Oftentimes there's a gap, to be very honest. You know, there is, if you ask you know, hey, can you list every single application in your business? Can you list their SLAs and SLOs that they have? Can you list their value or their job back to the business? Can you prescribe the security of each of those applications? Can you describe how they're architected? Are they architected in a monolithic way? Or are they architected in a microservice way, or something that scales horizontally versus vertically? You know, if you talk to each and every customer, if they could at a minimum stack rank, which ones are the most valuable to the business or the most mission critical to the business, or which ones have to stay up or what go down, or, maybe even if we loop security into this, which is a very common thread, you know, is there any compliance that has to be driven around these applications? Oftentimes, you know, there's some understanding, but there's not a great understanding. And so when you talk about, you know, how can clients address this? The number one thing that can be done is just to walk into this cloud journey, eyes wide open. Walk into it with a really good understanding of why you're doing it. Not because somebody thought it was going to be a good idea, not because somebody thought it was going to be cheaper, not because somebody thought they needed some service in some public cloud very specifically, but go through the research, like use, you know, our capabilities that we can provide, you know, from Insight or from Dell Technologies, which, you know, there's a tremendous amount of things that we can provide and help our clients do, both of us, especially together. But really walk into this with a good understanding of, do I understand what those applications are? Do I understand what the value is of actually putting them into a public cloud or a private cloud or into a SaaS model? What is it that I'm going to derive out of that decision that I'm not getting today? And does it align to all of the things that I would describe that people should know about that application, the SLAs, SLOs, the governance, the risk, the mission criticality, the value, et cetera, Once you get all of those and you wrap them all together, then you don't end up in a position where you have to repatriate. You don't end up in a position where, you know, some of the things that we've talked about that, hey, we put a whole bunch in there and half of it came back out because we got it wrong, because the first time you do it, you get it right.
That's absolutely the goal. And again, we try to tell IT leaders that you don't need to be first, you need to be right. And you don't want to be the IT leader that has had to make the decision and take the extra time and effort to pull something back, to make that change. Invest that time up front, understand where you need to go, and then drive purposefully to get there.
And, I love that, John, because it's if you look at our practice, our approach at doing this thing, we spend about 80% of our time doing the planning, the making sure that the business understanding is there, the financial understanding is there, the operational understanding is there, and we have a plan for execution before we even start the first migration. So 80% of our time during the project is spent on the planning and verifying before we do the execution. And in fact, the execution, regardless of if we're moving from private to public or from public to private or actually public to public, in any of those directions, we spend what seems like an inordinate amount of time planning, but the execution itself becomes almost robotic. And that's exactly what you want. You want to be able to make sure that your execution of that migration is the easiest part, not the hardest part.
Before we close, John, Juan, and Paul, I'd like to ask each of you to offer a key takeaway from our discussion today. John, perhaps you could go first.
Sure. I think the key takeaway for me is that people understand there's a huge variety of environments for their technology, and that they need to understand a little bit about the different environments, but perhaps more importantly, understand their own requirements, understand their applications, understand the uses of their applications and what they're looking for to make the best decision going forward.
Juan, what's your key takeaway?
I'm going to recap one of my prior points. Plan, execute. That's the best way to be purposeful about this. I keep on using that word because I think it's an important one to keep in mind of all of this. And regardless of which direction you end up doing, make sure you follow the process every time. And I'll guarantee you get the same results, right? Now, if your process is broken, we can help you with that. But if you have a good process, follow the process each and every time.
Great. And Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Stan. My key takeaway today is just this great conversation that we've had around the right way to attack cloud adoption. Most people, when you say the word cloud, what they hear is public cloud. Really, cloud is an operating model. It's a way of acquiring resources. It's a way of actually, securing. It's a way of actually billing, and the way that you pay and you utilize. And it's a lot of those things. And there's a lot of opportunity, especially with tremendous value-added partners like Insight and system integrators. And I think I would just share with everybody, my key takeaway would be is pick up the phone, call Insight, call Dell Technologies. Let us help you. We have a tremendous amount of tools and resources that we can provide to help shed the light that we've discussed today for each individual company. And let us help you. Let us help you actually build that purposeful, that practical, that strategic adoption of cloud and what that means for each business. And so that, ultimately it drives the value that you're looking forward to provide.
Thanks, Paul. That sounds like great advice. Well, that is all the time we have in this on-demand webcast. Sincere thanks to our three experts, John O'Shaughnessy, Infrastructure Architect and Senior Consultant at Insight, Juan Orlandini, Chief Architect at Insight, and Paul Joyce, North America Corporate Field CTO at Dell. Thanks to all three for explaining how to achieve alignment between public and private clouds at your organization. For more information on this topic, please see the resources area of your screen. And thanks for joining us. For Insight, Dell Technologies, and IDG, I'm Stan Gibson.